Welcome to the Ideas Hour with your hosts David Cameron and Suzanne Zeedyk, exploring big ideas that matter. This series was originally broadcast on Teacher Hug Radio in 2021 and 2022. It is still available in their archive as well as in this format.
I cannot wait to make a start in today's Ideas Hour for a whole number of reasons. Today's guest, Caspar Addyman, whom Suzanne will tell you more about as soon as I stop raving on, was a guest in a recent conversation that I organised and facilitated. We'll give you the link at the end of this show, and I loved listening to him. I also loved the fact that he coped not only with a bout of COVID, but also with some real technological glitches. You simply cannot ignore that level of resilience.
And you can't ignore the deep meaningfulness of Caspar's work. Caspar is a developmental psychologist and the director of Goldsmith's Infant Lab. He's interested in how babies adapt to the world and how we can support their learning. And the big idea that we want to focus on today is what babies' laughter helps us to understand about how their mind works and about how they're reading the world and about how they're making sense of the world. Because our society tends to think of laughter as something sweet and something cute, but it's so much more profound than that. In fact, it's so significant that Caspar's had a whole book on it published in 2019. So the aim of today is to help listeners understand what infant psychologists have understood for some time. Caspar, welcome to the Ideas Hour.
Hi, Suzanne, David, hello. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Okay, Caspar. So tell us how baby laughter is something more than sweet and why the public's understanding of that matters.
I think one of the best ways to describe this is sort of how I came to it. So I'm a developmental psychologist. I've been studying babies for 15 years, trying to work out what are they thinking, how are they learning about the world. And when I first thought about baby laughter, I thought, this is a clue as to what they understand. This is, they're only going to laugh when they get a joke. And so it gives you a different way to peer into their minds. As I started looking at it and sort of asking parents all over the world about the things that made their babies laugh, I realized that it really isn't about that at all. It's not about what does a baby find humorous. It's not about a joke. It's about a connection. The reason babies laugh is to sort of share what they're feeling with the people that they're with. And that's actually a lot of the reason why we laugh as well. We're laughing, to connect with other people. And once you see laughter in that way, you see it very differently, especially when it relates to babies.
I just love that, Caspar, because the conversation that we did previously in Edinburgh was all about laughter and the importance of laughter. And you did marvelously because you held your own with some people who make their living out of laughter. And it was just wonderful. But I'm really interested in what the implications of this are for education. So can you tell us a wee bit about how these two things relate? Your work on baby laughter and education.
Yeah, so I think it's always weird to sort of say what we mean by education for under twos or even under fours or under sixes. I think often people have the wrong idea about what is the goal of education for that age group. And I think part of what's missing in that perspective is the understanding that what you're really trying to do for the youngest babies and children is let them learn for themselves. You're setting up spaces and situations and events where they really engage with something new and they they discover something from it. You're not teaching at that stage, you're providing a space for learning. With all of that sort of as a sort of a preamble, laughter really is one of the best clues that they're getting it and that you're doing it right, because one of the things that laughter signals from a baby is that they're really, really engaged with what's happening right at that moment. So yeah, that joy and happiness that sort of accompanies laughter is an excellent signal, a child that really is sort of in the moment of whatever it is that's happening. And their laughter sort of tells you that they want to do more of whatever it is you're doing. And I think in an education setting, that's a signal that you'll always be looking for. In classrooms with older children, of course, as we talked in our previous conversation, David, it's harder to bring that laughter into a structured environment. But for babies and toddlers, I think seeing laughter for what it tells you about that baby is great. I mean, turning it round also, I think if you set out to find things which are going to make the baby laugh, you're going to be in a situation where they're learning lots.
You're tapping into something really fundamental, which is the big debate in education about whether it's just delivery. You know, that there's quite a strong argument from, Michael Gove was particularly forceful in England on the idea that all we needed was 4 rooms and a teacher in front of a class so that they could impart. And what you're talking about is how we structure the possibility of learning and how we support the natural commitment that, in your case, babies, but in my view, young people at all stages have to learning. That capacity is always there. And I think you're getting us into that real tension around how much of education at any point, whether it's secondary, whether it's primary, whether it's dealing with infants, is simply about imparting and conditioning, and how much it's about supporting. And Suzanne, I know that you've been talking a lot about the analogy of carpenters and gardeners in terms of education. And again, I think what Caspar's doing is really bringing us back into that debate and discussion.
In fact, David, what I hear you saying is if we had more laughter in the classroom of children, young people of all ages, would that actually assist learning? So if we set up the environment differently, does the process of learning change? Do they become more engaged? And Caspar, that speaks to much wider implications, I think, of your work. Do you think David and I have reached too far here? Does your research on baby laughter tell us something about, older human beings?
It would be great if people took that ball and ran with it in sort of the education setting. I mean, this might be a good point to sort of bring in, why do we laugh at all? What was the evolutionary background to laughter? Once you start realizing that laughter is not about jokes and it's about people, then there is quite a good story we can tell about, right, where does it come from? And this actually primarily comes from the evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar, who was at Oxford. I think he's now retired. And he observed this idea of ancient human sort of success was because we were a social species. We went round in these sort of hunter-gatherer tribes, groups of about 150 individuals. And that is 3 to 5 times the size of the social groups of other primates, such as chimpanzees or gorillas. So we're in a much bigger social group. So that includes everybody from babies up to grandparents and great-grandparents. Much more than an extended family. This is sort of like a whole village of people who really know each other. And for that to be successful, you have to know each other. You have to get on with each other as much as you can. The trick that primates have for this is they spend a lot of their time grooming each other. So when you see a chimpanzee carefully grooming another, they're not picking fleas off just for the hygiene of picking fleas off. It's to invest quality time with that other chimpanzee. It's sort of really is a quid pro quo of you scratch my back, I scratch yours, to show that we care about each other. It's it's a real commitment in time. As our social groups got bigger, we really couldn't do this. We had to find other ways to sort of socially glue the group together. This is where Robin Dunbar thought that laughter arose, and basically language sort of grew out of laughter and other sort of emotional conversations. So he imagined that we started vocalizing to sort of share how we were feeling with each other. Sort of communication amongst these individuals could now not just be one-on-one, but it to be to a small group of 1 to 3 or something. So what you have here is, to socially bond a group, you start gossiping, essentially. You start spending time sharing how you're feeling with other people. Part of that is the ups and downs of the day, but laughter really is completely key to that, because laughter is this very strong signal. It is something that we can't easily fake. Other people know that whether we're being genuine or not. It's something which it makes us vulnerable when we're laughing. We're actually sort of physically a bit incapable of doing other things. And it's quite sort of an energetic thing. If you're meeting with strangers, you'll often sort of fall back on laughter as a bonding mechanism. And within this sort of early hunter-gatherer world, Robin Dunbar's idea was that laughter is this really important bit of social glue. What's interesting in that theory is that he never mentioned babies and children. And this is when I looked at this and sort of realized, well, babies and children laugh way more than we do. They also laugh for the other big reason that we see in other animals for laughter, which is play. So in other species, rats, chimpanzees, in fact, I think there was a recent study that's found about 60 or 70 animals that have laughter in some form. And in all these other animals, laughter is associated with social play. So what we had in human is like laughter now having two roles. It's partly for social play, but it's also for social connection and for bonding. In the middle of all of that, babies and sort of really young children are a completely key component of why it's become so important. We have this very complex social world, and we're bringing young children into it. They have so much to learn. They have so many things where they need to connect with us. And laughter and just sort of real pure expression of emotion is part of the secret sauce that makes that work.
Thank you. And thank God we're online, because if we were live and in the studio, I would have started grooming you about halfway through that. What you did, and I love the way this happens on these programs, is you touched on a whole lot of the themes that we picked up in an earlier conversation with Ben Bradley, who deals with Darwin's psychology and that whole idea of an interactive species. And when we had that conversation, we mentioned Harari and Sapiens and that whole idea of humanity as a social species being key to its development. You also touched on a lot of discussion we had with Darcy Narvaez about the nest and how important it is to have people in communities, and your concept of the village, if you like, to go back to that cliche, raising a child. You've made so many links, Caspar, and one of the fundamental links you've made is that we need to tap in to who we are and how we are when we think about learning and education. And that idea of using laughter and the expression of emotion as a way of taking the pulse of learning seems to me to be a really helpful and powerful idea. But Suzanne has a yet further element she's going to bring in here, I think, with a musical link.
What I hear you saying, Caspar, is that human beings are meant to share. They're meant that we're wired for connection. Lots of people will know that I talk about that a lot. I think that what's surprising for many people is that babies can do that. The babies are born able to share, able to connect, and able to be active participants in social exchanges. So sometimes that's described by infant psychologists as a jazz duet, as a spontaneous musical exchange. Do you think that's an accurate way to describe it? And what do psychologists mean by that? Because that'll be a surprise for lots of our listeners.
Yes, I think it's absolutely true that this is like a really crucial bit of what's going on from the very beginning. So if we're trying to socially connect, you see it from the moment babies are born that they turn towards people. They focus on human faces more than anything else. From the moment babies arrive, we start having conversations with them. Actually, pregnant mothers will be having conversations before the baby arrives, but once the baby's actually out there in the world, and we do this because we can't help not do it, but when we talk to them, we wait for their response. We actually are involving them in a conversation. A conversation is not the words that you're saying. It is the turn taking. It is that there are two people here who are trying to understand each other. By the time we're our age, people are so good at verbal conversation that we kind of overlook that you really need to sort of have a lot of practice before you can do that with just anybody. And I think from the very beginning, we're starting to have conversations with babies. And then look at it from their point of view. They are little humans. They are cut from the same cloth as us and will have the brain that's going to be able to support all of this. And so what they're getting out of those sort of early interactions is the beginning of learning to have a conversation, learning to interact with another human being. And it's a really complex process. So it is nearly as complex as jazz. I think that is a useful analogy to make, because the timing of how you interact is really crucial, and it's really subtle. And I think I see a lot of these wonderful dissections that Suzanne does on her Twitter feed of little conversations that babies and parents have. If you just pick any short video of a mother and a baby, father and a baby conversing, and pay close attention to what's going on, there are so many different processes happening at the same time, and the timing of what's going on is completely crucial. So babies need to learn that. They need to practice at that, because we've been doing it all our lives. We underestimate, like so many things in life, we underestimate how difficult it is to learn, how much one needs to do to practice that. One sort of really simple example I sort of often use to illustrate this is, if you put a little baby in front of a mirror, they're now interacting with somebody that is not in a conversation with them, but that's actually completely in sync with them. And they don't really understand what a mirror is, but they understand that there's something very, very weird going on here, that every time I try to speak, this other person tries to do something too. And it usually ends in a burst of tears or in a peal of laughter in those very early encounters.
So Caspar, that illustrates something really, really basic. And it speaks to a big debate that infant psychologists have had. We've used the word learn in this conversation because we often use that word to describe what babies are doing, is learning how to do something, learning about the world. But there's a really fundamental question here. Do babies have to learn how to have a conversation? In other words, there's this debate in infant psychology where some psychologists said, we teach babies how to have a conversation. And the other side of that debate said, no, 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 we don't. Babies are born able to turn take, able to be active participants in a conversation. They just learn with us, like in interactions with us, how to make that more complex, and what the timings of our culture are, and what the rhythms are, and how intense you're allowed to get or how calm you have to stay. So to go back to what you said, I hear you saying that we don't teach babies how to have conversations, that they come into the world already able to do that, which is why they think a mirror is weird. What happens is that they learn about the complexities of that with us. Have I got that right in your view?
Yes, lots of things. It's always near impossible to say how much has been built in by sort of nature and how much is nurture. I think humans do come with a predisposition. They come ready to have these conversations. They come ready for turn taking, and I think what then happens is that it's a very complex process. The bit that sort of perhaps develops more slowly is your ability to have agency while you're doing that. So babies do have this ability to take turns, but we're really facilitating that from very early on. We're really driving the conversation a lot of the time in those early interactions. What babies are learning over those first few years is their ability to sort of be in the driving seat. It is a bit like learning to drive a car. When you're first learning to do it, you can't carry on sort of thinking about other things. You're so focused on just, have I put my feet in the right place? Am I going to press the wrong buttons? And am I going to crash into something? And with practice, you then be able to do higher order things, so talk to the person next to you. For babies, it's really the same, that at first, in any interaction, just the mere fact of interacting is quite an overwhelming, difficult thing. And this is where it's important that the partner that a baby is interacting with is sensitive to that and really stops and thinks, I'm dealing with somebody who's brand new to the world here. And this is where we can make a difference by opening up the space for that baby to have some control over the situation, rather than the alternative of us dominating it, which you do see a lot with people interacting with babies who aren't very thoughtful about it. That you're just up in the baby's face all the time. Even then, babies do have ways of disengaging with us, and this is sort of something you'll see from even the tiniest babies. If something gets overwhelming, they will turn away, they'll shut down, they'll burst into tears. So they kind of do have tools to deal with it, but it's a very complex set of skills to develop. And so we should be thinking that we're trying to help them develop those skills.
Caspar, what I love about this little exchange that we just had, and David, you're great to have here because you're not a baby specialist. So you're like lots of our listeners this morning that will be listening to this and thinking, what do I make of that? The reason that I think the conversation we just had speaks to profound questions is, what capacities do human beings bring with them when they're born in the world? And we all have unconscious ideas about that we often don't even know, that our culture or our family teaches us. So if we think that babies are active participants in a conversation, even if we don't know we think that, then we're more sensitive to them. We notice different things. But if we intuitively think babies are blank slates that I have to teach everything to, or that babies are not sensitive to what I'm doing, you have different kinds of interactions with babies. So that question about what capacities are we born with as human beings is a really, really, really profound question. David, do you think that is coming out of this conversation that Caspar and I have just been having?
Yes, I do. And I mean, I've been fascinated listening to that exchange. We're all babies. when we come into a new situation that we've not encountered before, when we come to new learning, and we all make the same kind of decisions as to how far we're going to go, and we'll be led in that. And I think, Caspar, this is one of the points that you make that's profoundly interesting for people at all stages. We will all make decisions as to how far we move forward and how far we progress in a learning context, depending on the encouragement, depending on the welcome, depending on the level of engagement. And if you go back to Suzanne's analogy about jazz, if somebody gives you a real cue in the theme that they play or the improvisation that they make, you've got a place to take off from when you play. And that's what makes combinations in jazz so powerful. Keith Jarrett, Miles Davis playing together, John Coltrane, all of that, I think, reflects this. So this is profound about early years, but I also think it's profound at all stages. And if I may, one of the things that really strikes me about your work, Caspar, is the oh wow factor. You know, that element where people go, oh wow. So what, babies laugh? Do they make jokes? Babies do all this? That's amazing. You know, that real kind of stoner vibe that people get, that headline vibe. Oh wow, that's amazing. Do you worry that your work will be trivialized rather in this way? That the oh wow factor will dominate rather than the profound discussion that you're now having around it?
Not so much, because it's a joyful topic, and I think having more joy in the world is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's a way to draw people's attention. Maybe we won't get to the bigger wow if we didn't have that first. What's this novelty of the jokes that make a 6-month-old baby laugh? Yeah, if you don't sort of capture people's attention by sort of something accessible like that, the ideas that we've been talking about today are hard to grasp. They're hard to understand, and they're quite deep as well. And I think I don't mind that laughter is a moderately accessible way into that. The nature of it, that's the fact that you and a baby can share a laugh and you are as equals in that interaction, is part of why we laugh. It's part of the strength of it. It's a real conversation as equals that you would have with someone from 3 months old as soon as they're able to laugh with you. Laughter is already doing that. And I think when you sort of present baby laughter, present sort of things about laughter and joy, maybe on more intellectual level, it serves the same purpose of, right, this connects people to what is quite a deep thing about sort of human flourishing.
And in fact, Caspar, one of the things I love about videos of babies laughing about something in the world, about a puppy or about daddy's ripping paper or about their sibling, there are tons of those videos around. If you look closely, what you often see is the baby looking up at the person doing the videoing. What you realize is that the baby is sharing the moment with the people around them. So it's as if the baby is looking up to check to go, are you seeing this? Are you seeing this? This is so funny. Don't you agree this is funny? So they pull people in to share the moment with them. Do you think people notice that? Do you think, like, when they're watching videos, or does it bypass us really quickly? Because, bypass the viewer really quickly. The thing is, if babies are aware enough of the people around them, that they're wanting to share the experience they're having, it goes back to speaking to this really basic need that we have to share experiences with other people, much in the form of grooming that you're talking about for primates. Do you think people catch that and watching babies laugh, or does it pass too quickly?
I think there's two easy ways that people will notice that. So firstly, why are baby videos so successful, and why do we see so many of them sort of on our social media feeds? Yeah, and why do we all enjoy watching them? It's because as soon as we're watching that baby sort of joyfully laughing at something, we join in. We can't help but being uplifted and being delighted by it. And so we notice, the first thing I think we notice when we watch those videos is that it has an effect on us. It's really connecting us to like, oh, isn't that wonderful? A moment after noticing that, you can then notice that the other people in that video with the baby, I mean, it's impossible not to notice, really. They have that same reaction, that they are just delighted that this baby is delighted, that you've got this feedback loop of, that baby is just having a wonderful time, and now I'm having a wonderful time. And part of what's keeping this going is that the baby knows that I'm having a wonderful time too. Once you've felt that yourself at the first time of watching those videos, and then you look at the other people in the video with the baby, and you sort of, wow, they're feeling it even more strongly than I am just watching it as a video. Look how happy all of those people are. And yeah, so I think people intuitively can have that feeling of like, right, what's going on? I don't think very many people then go that step further, that as you so often do, Susan, to pick it apart sort of bar by bar. If we go back to our musical analogy of just how much turn taking is involved with that, and how much back and forth there is between the baby and the other people in that sort of situation.
Well, one of the things that I think people are really interested in, Caspar, is how they make change. And you provided a brilliant map, I think. You've talked about the impact of the wow factor. I loved that idea that you had about the initial wow leading on to the bigger and more meaningful wow. You talked about the springboard of delight. You raised all sorts of ideas and concepts, and clearly, given that you've got your book out, and we'll provide a link to that at the end of the show, you have managed to get people to take this work seriously. You've propelled it beyond the world of cat video, and successful in the establishment of Infant Lab. So what lessons are there from your experience of the establishment of Infant Lab and the work and engagement that you've done in helping people to understand how we make these connections and take these kind of ideas forward?
Yeah, so it's a very big question, and I don't think I have a full answer at this stage. I think sort of the lesson that I like to bring out of sort of the work I've been doing when people think about babies is that we should really marvel, I guess, at just how much is going on in the first 2 years, the first 6 years. I think maybe you could keep going for the whole of life, that the things you're learning and the things that we're growing to understand are not the things on the surface. It's a much more holistic. I think the book ends up it builds toward what is the secret of happiness for anybody. What is the secrets of human flourishing? I often say that my approach is like positive psychology, but for babies. And the positive psychology movement was a really important approach to how people's minds and brains work, to not focus on all the negative things, but to really say, right, when things are going well, what does that look like? What does sort of people meeting their goals, people being sort of in control of their lives and feeling that their lives are meaningful, what does that look like? And that seems really distant from what does it look like for an 18-month-old doing things. But actually, when you look back at young babies, they really are giving us huge clues as to what the secrets of happiness are. So they every day are facing new challenges, and they are pushing themselves to succeed at something that they couldn't do the day before. And every time you see it, every time a baby can do something new, there are squeals of delight and peals of laughter and just a sense of pride and joy in what they've done. I can take steps for the first time. I can look, I can sort of stumble towards you, or they've going to the zoo and be able to name all these animals that for the first time they've never seen except in books. Their delight at being able to map these things, into the real world. They are succeeding, and this is what positive psychology is all about. It's about, when are people succeeding in things? This sense of looking at where we start out from as babies, and sort of just what it takes for a baby to succeed, and what we do to support them. I think we are able to give some answers about that. I think, looking back at babies who wear their hearts on their sleeves about this, and where the processes are sort of writ large, because the learning that they're doing is so accelerated and so spectacular to see, is a huge lesson that we can take away for life more generally.
So, Caspar, one of the things I'm really enjoying about this conversation is that we are going back and forth from babies, who people often see as, well, they're sweet and they're little and it's the beginning and it's not addressing very big questions. And then we're moving to those big questions about the nature of human life, about the nature of human communication, about how we have change in the world. And then we go back to this smaller bit. Well, we can learn a lot about that from babies.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
And that part of the reason they teach us that is that we come into the world as human beings able to share. And so that's part of the profundity, I think, of your work, is that if we are wired to connect, and that is part of our vision, for how we operate in the world and how we are happy, that speaks to big questions about why we need to put relationships at the center of policies.
One of the things I've found amazing about this conversation in general is this discussion about how we make the kind of fundamental change you've just spoken about, Suzanne. Putting relationships at the heart of policy is a big idea. And we talked about how we did that. And one of the things I think you've demonstrated particularly well, Caspar, is that interaction between the enthusiasm and the academic research, and the observation and the exemplification. And I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed is the fact that both you and Suzanne have started from this point of early development and then gradually have built this up into a much wider conversation, because you're both scientists, you're both committed to science and the approach to science, but you're also committed to sharing that in a way that's accessible enough to people to make change. I think your book is a fabulous means of doing that. I think participation in this type of conversation is a really important means of doing that. So, I think we've got a really good demonstration here of some of the ways that we can open up debate and discussion. But key to it, I think, has been something else that you've touched on throughout the conversation, and that's the importance of agency. That when we talk down, then we lose that real, we talk with, then that changes everything. And I think that's part of the imagery that we're trying to set up here. Is that a reasonable interpretation of where we've got to in some of this discussion?
That certainly feels like a really important point to me, yes. And you see when you're interacting with a baby that it's very clear the power imbalance is so big that you have to work extra hard to give the baby agency. And I think as the child grows up, we kind of forget that. We take it for granted that they'll be able to keep up with whatever we're giving them. And I think, whenever there are power imbalances of any kind, it's really important for the person who's holding that powerful position to stop and think about, am I giving room for this other party to really have genuine agency? And I think looking at the interaction with babies, it throws that into relief, but it's a really key point.
No, I love the graphic nature, Caspar, of what you said. And I love that phrase of throwing into relief, which seems so appropriate here, because so many of our concerns that we have through the ideas hour is about how we get those who have power to engage in the discussion that will allow them to ask questions and to be curious. And you seem to have created a wonderful analogy. I love that discussion that you had there about the very evident imbalance of power, which requires the extra effort to engage. So I think there's something really useful there that takes us beyond the conversation we're having and into a wider societal conversation. Suzanne.
Let me illustrate this with something intended to be controversial. In education, many schools have behavior policies, and the focus is on getting children to behave in a way that's in accord with what the teacher wants, with what the school wants, with perhaps what society wants. But there's a big debate around that now, that actually what you end up with is compliant children. And that compliance isn't about agency and being with, it's explicitly about dominance. Okay, and I've introduced that because talking about behavior policies makes teachers anxious, right? It's a big debate at the moment. Do you think your work and the withness, the sharing that you're talking about, Caspar, does that speak to things like behavior policies or relationship agreements, which is what some schools have shifted to? Do you think what you're talking about in human beings speaks to these important, really practical, controversial topics?
Yes, absolutely. I guess the tricky bit for me is that I can't say too much intelligent about those. I mean, from a very superficial understanding, I absolutely see the problems with that approach. I guess what the bit I don't always know is the extent to which those are pragmatic fixes for lack of resources. So when you have a behavior policy, when you're trying to bring sort of control into this situation, the best way to do it would be to have more teaching resources. And without that, you introduce more of these regimented systems and mechanisms of control. And whether that is because people think that's the best way or because that's a consequence of the under-resourced environment in which you're trying to do these things, is not a question I know very much about.
And I think that's an important message for listeners to this show to hear. I think people are often intimidated because they're being asked to adopt something, that we continually name things, that we need a trauma-informed approach, or we need a relationship-based policy. And I think people often become intimidated by the extent of change. And I think the understanding that you displayed in that answer, that what we really need is people to do their best in the circumstances that they're in, to challenge the circumstances, if need be, to themselves victims, if you like, of a sense of failure. And I think there's something really rich in that in terms of giving agency back to professionals as well. So I think people really welcome that message, which I think you're giving, which is be curious, understand as well, filter that through the capacity that you have to make that change and do your best with that. And then I think what we're looking for through this is to get people cumulatively to begin to make possible change. That, I think, has been a particularly helpful contribution. Thanks for that. Suzanne.
It's funny because we started by talking about baby laughter. And again, so many people think that that is sweet. And we have now moved to these really big issues that you're talking about, David. Caspar, can I ask if people usually frame your work in the way that David and I have here?
It's very rare that we've gone this deep. It's been really wonderful, actually, to think about the really big questions in a meaningful setting. So, we're starting from babies and we're working our way up. Whereas I think a lot of the time it just stays as David said, these wow, surprising facts about infant development and just how much happens in that period. We don't take these steps back and say, what is the really big, profound message behind all of that? So I think, this has been a wonderful opportunity to take that big picture approach.
Caspar, if we've been able to do these big ideas then, do you want to tell us where your book fits into them? Because we've mentioned your book, but we haven't really let you tell listeners about what you tried to do in that book. So tell us a bit about that.
So it's called The Laughing Baby, and it basically goes through the first 2 years of life, looking at every aspect of what babies have to succeed in that time. So from the very beginning of just what does sleep mean, and when do emotions and sort of feelings really start to appear? Are there even emotions in the womb? What would that mean? Why do babies need to sleep so much? How do they start to control their bodies? So starting from those really fundamental, helpless newborn baby aspects, but going through some really subtle, complicated things like, where do our very first concepts and ideas come from? What is the origin of thinking as humans do it as opposed to other species? And then linked to that is, where did language come from? What kickstarts language as a species and for a baby? How do they manage basically to teach themselves a language from scratch? This is something where we really don't set out to instruct babies. They figure that out and map it onto the world. Then pausing briefly to think of music. Again, another human universal. What is it there for? Where does it come from? And babies might play a role in that music seems to be a way of sharing emotional connection with other people. Singing together was a really profound, important thing in our evolutionary history. Singing lullabies and songs to calm and soothe the baby is a really sort of universal part of parenting. And then getting on to what it means to be you. So where does your sense of yourself come from? What's the first point that a baby knows that they are an individual? And I think the first times that they realize that they have the power to make other people laugh is a really key moment in their exploration of their own agency and free will. And then it finishes on just the beginnings of friendships. So the book just sort of covers all of that, which is a lot, and which I think a lot of the time we don't think about as being what babies are doing. We think they're sitting up, they're walking, and they're talking, they're learning to potty training. There's so much more to what's happening in that period that is profound human skills, and that's what I try and uncover in the book. I've rarely then tried to then turn it into useful lessons that extend beyond that. And it's great to have these conversations as a way to think about that, sort of the impact of the book and what happens next, I think.
You've already said so much about education more widely. But the question we always ask is, what is it that you would like education policy makers, schools, early years centres, teachers, other educators to do with your ideas?
Yeah, that is a good question, a difficult question. I think for the things I've been saying, and I think a lot of what my work is about is more about that why question than about the how question. So I perhaps would just like people to bring into policy and sort of thinking about how you do things, some of these answers as to why we're doing them, which feels like they're a bit more overlooked than they should be at the moment. And the answers to why we're doing it is all about promoting the ability to have agency, the ability to connect with other people, letting education be more self-directed than it often can be, to promote all of that, and about space as well. I know a lot of these things really are about pausing, waiting for somebody to come back with something to you, and you can't do that without empty space in a timetable for the unexpected, for sort of the unusual. So I think those are probably the things I would like people to take away from this. If people can turn that into something that is policy that can guide without dictating, I would love to hear.
Caspar, let me give that to you. I hear you saying we should take babies and young children seriously, give them space to be partners in the conversations with us, and that we should be sure that we are not dominating the emotional and conversational and learning space. That's what I hear you saying we should be doing, and I totally am in favor of that message.
It might seem paradoxical that we start talking about laughing babies and we end up saying take them seriously, but it's seriously, and I say it quite a lot, the best way to promote laughter and joy and delight is to take somebody seriously, to give them your full attention. That is a wonderful summary, Susan. Yeah, I couldn't have put it better.
And I wouldn't attempt to put it better either. What you did at the end was almost give a manifesto, not for simply today's program, but for those series of programs. That's what we want to do. We want to engage, we want to guide, we don't want to dictate. We think that people in contexts and classrooms and early year centres and care settings, wherever they are, they're the ones most likely to know the how. What we need to do is raise the question why. You have done that brilliantly this morning. Thank you so much for being part of the Ideas Hour.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
If you would like to know more about Caspar Addyman's work, a good place to start is with his book, The Laughing Baby, published in 2020 by Unbound and subtitled The Extraordinary Science Behind What Makes Babies Happy. Caspar also has a TED Talk available called Why Babies Laugh, and he leads in that creative conversation that David mentioned at the start of the program. It's on the Creative Conversations Education Scotland YouTube site under the title Make Me Smile. And if you get really curious, you can even look up the work of Robin Dunbar, who Caspar mentioned. He's an anthropologist, and he has a TED Talk with the great title, Can the Internet Buy You More Friends? So I reckon that's plenty of follow-up to leave you all with, and we thank you for being with us today to explore what is a profound idea.
This has been the Ideas Hour, brought to you by Suzanne Zeedyk and the real David Cameron.